first we're looking at this bill of spending that's happening, and we'll be following that. And then we have Prime Minister Trudeau on Turner. And then right after that, the Conservatives 2IC Deputy, Candice Bergen. Watch this.
Ms. Qualtrough, seconded by Ms. Jordan, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Relating to Economic Recovery in Response to COVID-19. The motion is deemed adopted. Ms. Qualtrough, seconded by Ms. Jordan, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall the bill be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Statements by ministers. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that I rise today in this House to pay tribute to the late Right Honourable John Turner, Canada's 17th Prime Minister. I knew John my whole life, and he believed fiercely in the values that make us who we are as Canadians. Values like treating everyone with dignity and respect, and always being willing to stand up for what is just and right. Today, we remember him as a House of Commons man, a strong advocate for equality and a champion of our democracy. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, we live in an extraordinary country, and it is thanks in part to people like John Turner. John developed an attachment to democracy early in life. When he was young, his mother taught him the importance of public service. Throughout his career, first as a lawyer and then as a politician, he always showed elegance and humility. John treated everyone as equals with dignity and respect. And even when he was very busy, he never forgot the birthdays of anyone that he knew. As an MP, he had the privilege of serving in 3 different provinces. He had a great mastery of law and democracy, which allowed him to make major changes to the criminal code. His work at the Department of Justice opened the way to legal aid in Canada to ensure that everybody can have access to their rights, no matter what their background or economic background was. This changed the lives of thousands and millions of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, when anyone had a discussion with John, it was easy to see just how much he loved Canada. He always talked about his country with a great deal of hope and optimism. For him, Canada was a place where we respected each other and helped each other, where equality was a style of life.
just last year that John was on the Hill to celebrate his 90th birthday with people from across the political spectrum. And I remember how he was still passionate about strengthening our democratic institutions. He used to say that democracy doesn't happen by accident. He was right. John knew that keeping our democracy strong and free meant we needed to put in the hard work to keep it that way. He believed in the incredible power of young people to get involved in our democratic process and encouraged them to do that wherever he could. John knew Canadians, regardless of age or background, formed the heart of our country, and that our future depended on all of us working together for everyone. Today, as we mourn his loss and reflect on his legacy, let's all remember our ability to give back to our own communities. To his wife, Gilles, and their children, Elizabeth, Michael, David, and Andrew. To John's grandchildren, his sister Brenda Norris, his brother-in-law, David Kilgore. Your husband, loving father, and brother was a great Canadian. We are all so lucky you shared him with us. To my fellow Canadians, I invite you to join us in signing the virtual Book of Condolences, and together, let us continue to work to defend and strengthen our democracy, and as John once said, let's not take this country for granted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
Monsieur le Président,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the official opposition and the Conservative Party of Canada, I have the honour to pay tribute to the memory of former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable John Turner.
Mr. Speaker, some people leave their mark on this place in a way that outlasts them by decades. To walk the halls and to see their portraits is to be reminded daily that you stand where they stood. The tributes that have poured out to Mr. John Turner in the last week could easily lead one to believe and to think that the very existence of the modern Liberal Party is his greatest legacy. So many veterans of Martin and Chrétien campaigns of the 90s and early 2000s took to television, to social media, and to their local radio or newspaper this week to pay tribute to the man that they give credit with getting them involved in politics. Their stories had one common theme. They spoke to a plain truth that John Turner never forgot, that so many who have held the same lofty offices he did have never known. John Turner cared about individual Canadians, not just those that he encountered in the halls of power, where he spent more than 20 years as Attorney General, as a Finance Minister, as Prime Minister, and as Leader of the Opposition. Stories this week have been set in airplanes, taverns, church basements, and coffee shops. Stories of a man who took the extra time to know their stories and to remember their names. We have a tendency in moments like this to turn men into monuments. And with the Prime Minister with a past as an Olympian athlete and a Rhodes Scholar, that would be very easy to do. But to Canadians who shared their stories this week of a man who remembered their names years after first meeting them, of a politician who inspired them to get off the couch, of an adversary without a shred of malice in his heart, the John Turner who comes through is one who always had more interest in being a person than he ever had in being a portrait. As the story goes, and this is a very interesting one, and one when I first heard, Mr. Speaker, I did question, is this actually true? And when I tell you this story, for those of you who haven't heard it, I think you're going to share my awe in this story. So as the story goes, the young Liberal MP, John Turner, and his wife were vacationing in Barbados. While on the beach one morning, Mr. Turner's wife noticed a man out for a swim who appeared to be in trouble. The surf was rough that day. There was a strong undertow, and the elderly man was not a strong swimmer. Mr. Turner's wife anxiously alerted her husband to the situation. The young MP, who was a competitive swimmer in his university days, without hesitation plunged into the surf. Grasping the man in a life-saving hold, he struggled against the undertow and finally made it back to shore. Once on the beach, Mr. Turner set out to give the man mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. When the resuscitated gentleman came to his senses, who was the person that Mr. Turner had saved? None other than Progressive Conservative leader and former Prime Minister and the then Leader of the Opposition, John Diefenbaker. Isn't that unbelievable? It's one thing running into a colleague on a holiday. It's one thing running into an opposition colleague on a holiday. It's another thing saving that individual's life. But what an amazing story, and what a wonderful story. You know, Mr. Speaker, they say that the greatest compliments are those that come from your staunchest adversaries. And in spite of being one of his fiercest adversaries, former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney had this to say about Mr. Turner. And I quote, "The fact that he was a gentleman set him apart. He was Leader of the Opposition, and while we had many battles, there was no malice in the man. He was a man of principle. He brought a great sense of dignity to both himself and to the various jobs that he held. He always conducted himself with dignity and with elegance. I think he's going to be remembered as a Prime Minister and parliamentarian who contributed a great deal to Canada in the course of his highly successful life. He brought to politics a very good mind and a vision for Canada. He brought all those values, including integrity and dignity, to his job. He symbolized, I thought, much of what was best about Canada." What wonderful words, Mr. Speaker, and that was from our former Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, about the Right Honourable John Turner. In closing, Mr. Speaker, history has taught us that we always knew where John Turner stood. It didn't matter if you were the Prime Minister he served, the Canadian people he faced, or the party that he dedicated his life to. He did the hard job for every Prime Minister he served, and from what I've heard, when he disagreed with them, they knew it. In fact, John Turner is the last finance minister to have resigned from cabinet on principle. Mr. Turner had all the qualities that you would want in a Canadian statesman, even when you disagreed with him, and sometimes especially when you disagreed with him. Mr. Speaker, our public life is richer for the contributions that the Right Honourable John Turner made. May he rest in peace. Wow. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Well, it started out with the deputy. She's pretty nice, and obviously it's the passing of the Prime Minister. Leave your comments below on what do you think is going to come up. Is it going to get more hard-hitting as the day goes on? Stay tuned.